On the warm August morning of August 16, 1977, the world was shaken. News bulletins interrupted television programs and radio stations across America to announce the unthinkable. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had died at the age of 42. Fans wept in the street. Journalists swarmed Memphis, and thousands flocked to Graceland, his mansion, in disbelief. But this story does not begin with the tragedy of his final hours. To understand the end, you must first understand the boy who became the king. This is not just the tale of a celebrity. This is the story of a poor Southern child who reshaped music, challenged cultural boundaries, and left a mark that will never fade. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, to Vernon and Gladys Presley. He was their only surviving child. His twin brother Jesse Garon was stillborn. This loss haunted Elvis's mother, and it would cast a shadow over Elvis's life, shaping his deep connection to her and his lifelong sense of loneliness. From the beginning, he was surrounded by poverty. The Presleys lived in a tiny two-room shotgun house, built by his father and relatives. Money was scarce, opportunities limited, but inside their humble home, there was music, faith, and an unbreakable bond between mother and son. As a boy, Elvis absorbed the sounds of the South. He sang hymns in church, mesmerized by the gospel choirs that filled the room with passion and fire. On the streets of Tupelo, he heard the blues drifting from African-American neighborhoods, and the raw rhythm of country songs playing from local radios. Without knowing it, young Elvis was collecting pieces of a musical puzzle that would later explode into something the world had never heard before. He was shy and awkward as a child. His classmates often teased him for his unusual clothes, hand-me-downs from family members, and his quiet nature. But whenever he opened his mouth to sing, something magical happened. His voice carried soul, sorrow, and power far beyond his years. Gladys encouraged him, insisting that her boy had a special gift, and Elvis believed her, clinging to music as both an escape and a calling. In 1948, when Elvis was 13, the Presley family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. They settled into a housing project, barely scraping by, but Memphis would prove to be the turning point. It was here that Elvis discovered Beale Street, the heart of African-American culture and blues music. He stood outside clubs, listening to performers like B.B. King and Big Mama Thornton, soaking in the rhythm and style that mainstream America largely ignored. At the same time, he absorbed the twang of country music from radio broadcasts and the gospel quartets that filled the airwaves on Sundays. He didn't see boundaries between genres. He only saw music that moved him. By high school, Elvis was already experimenting with his look. He grew his hair longer, slicked it back with rose oil, and dressed in flashy clothes from Lansky Brothers, a store that catered to Memphis's African-American community. He stood out in a conservative South, where most boys wore short hair and plain shirts. Some mocked him, others admired him, but Elvis didn't care. He was creating an identity that was uniquely his own. After graduation, he worked odd jobs, truck driver, theater usher, while dreaming of something bigger. Then, in the summer of 1953, Elvis walked into Sun's studio, with $4 and a bold idea, to record a song as a gift for his mother. Studio owner Sam Phillips wasn't impressed at first, but Elvis's voice was unlike anything he had ever heard. When paired with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, something electric happened. During a late-night session in 1954, Elvis launched into an upbeat version of That's All Right, a blues number by Arthur Crudup. The moment was explosive. His voice, his energy, his rhythm. This wasn't blues, it wasn't country, it was something new. Radio DJs played the song, and the response was immediate. Phone lines lit up, teenagers demanded more, and suddenly Elvis Presley was on the map. His first performances were chaotic. Teenagers screamed, fainted, and rushed the stage. Parents and critics were horrified by his hip-shaking, calling it vulgar, dangerous, even immoral, but that only made teenagers love him more. Elvis was doing what no one else dared, blending black and white music, gospel and blues, country and pop, and turning it into a cultural revolution. By 1956, Elvis was everywhere, Heartbreak Hotel topped the charts. His first television appearances drew record audiences, and his performances ignited a frenzy that America had never seen. Women screamed and pulled at his clothes, men either envied or despised him, and teenagers across the country declared him their hero. He wasn't just a singer, he was a force, but with fame came controversy. Conservative America saw Elvis as a threat to morality. Newspapers denounced him as obscene, politicians called for his performances to be banned, and television producers tried to censor his movements by filming him only from the waist up. None of it worked. The more they tried to silence him, the louder the screams became. Elvis wasn't just entertaining, he was breaking down cultural walls, giving a voice to a new generation that refused to be silenced. Behind the spotlight, though, Elvis was still that shy Southern boy, deeply attached to his mother. Gladys worried about the pace of his rise, fearing fame would consume him. Elvis, in turn, leaned on her as his emotional anchor. When he bought his first mansion, Graceland, in 1957, it wasn't just for himself, it was for her, to give her the life she never had. By the late 1950s, Elvis was the most famous man in the world. His concerts drew record crowds, his records sold in the millions, and his movies introduced him to audiences far beyond music. He had become the king of rock and roll. But as quickly as he rose, forces were already conspiring to change his life. In 1958, at the height of his fame, Elvis was drafted into the U.S. Army. For 2 years, he served in Germany, far from the stage and the screaming fans. While the world wondered if his career would survive the break, tragedy struck. His mother Gladys fell ill and died in 1958. Elvis was devastated. Friends said he never recovered from the loss. She had been his greatest supporter, his safe place in a storm of fame, and without her, he felt unmoored. The army years also brought another fateful encounter. While stationed in Germany, Elvis met a young teenager named Priscilla Beaulieu. She would later become his wife, though their story was as complicated as it was romantic. When Elvis returned to America in 1960, he was still a superstar, but different. His raw, rebellious edge had softened. Hollywood studios and his manager Colonel Tom Parker pushed him into movies, dozens of light-hearted musicals that made money but drained his artistic soul. Elvis played soldiers, cowboys, and surfers, but the scripts were shallow, the songs forgettable. He longed to make serious music again, to feel the fire of the stage, but Parker's grip was iron. For most of the 1960s, Elvis's career stagnated. Yet even then, his presence never faded. Fans still adored him, and his charisma still commanded attention. But beneath the surface, Elvis was restless. He had conquered the world once, and he yearned to do it again. When Elvis returned from the army in 1960, the world was waiting. His fans still adored him, and America was eager to see if the king could reclaim his throne. But the Elvis who stepped off the plane was not the same rebellious figure who had set fire to the 1950s. He was older, more polished, and increasingly under the control of one man, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel Parker had steered Elvis's career since the mid-1950s, and while he was shrewd in business, he was ruthless in his methods. Parker saw Elvis not as an artist, but as a product, something to be packaged, sold, and endlessly marketed. To him, the movies offered steady income, global exposure, and far less risk than the unpredictable world of live performance, and so began Elvis's Hollywood years. Hollywood, the factory years between 1960 and 1969, Elvis starred in more than 24 films. Titles like Blue Hawaii, Girls, 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 and Viva Las Vegas filled theaters and made money, but artistically they drained him. The scripts were formulaic, the plots forgettable, and the songs often bland compared to his early fire. In Blue Hawaii 1961, Elvis played a returning soldier turned tour guide, singing ballads against the backdrop of Hawaiian beaches. The movie was a commercial success, and the soundtrack album became one of his best sellers. But soon, each film began to blur into the next. Elvis was trapped in a cycle, a lightweight comedy or romance, a handful of songs, a happy ending. To fans, Elvis was still Elvis, handsome, charming, with that velvet voice. But to Elvis himself, the years felt wasted. He longed to record meaningful music, to challenge himself, to perform live again. Instead, Parker kept signing contracts that locked him into more films. Elvis rarely fought back. His loyalty to Parker, combined with his own uncertainty, left him compliant. During this period, Elvis also leaned heavily on medication. To keep up with grueling filming schedules, he began relying on stimulants to stay awake and sedatives to sleep. At first it was manageable, but over time, the dependency grew. Love and marriage amid the monotony of Hollywood. One constant in Elvis's life was Priscilla Beaulieu. They had met in Germany when she was just 14, and despite their age difference, their relationship deepened over the years. In 1967, after much public speculation, Elvis and Priscilla married in Las Vegas. Their wedding was a media spectacle. Photographers swarmed, fans cheered, and the tabloids went wild. A year later, their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, was born, Elvis's only child and the light of his life. He doted on her, often carrying her around Graceland, singing to her softly, and insisting she would grow up knowing she was loved. But behind the fairy tale image, cracks formed. Elvis was gone for long stretches of filming and tours, and his reliance on pills grew. Priscilla, still very young, struggled with the pressures of being married to the world's most famous man. Their marriage was passionate, but turbulent, marked by long absences, jealousies, and emotional distance. The '68 comeback special. By the mid-1960s, Elvis's career was faltering. The Beatles had stormed America, Bob Dylan was redefining songwriting, and rock music had evolved far beyond the safe formula of Elvis's movies. For many, Elvis seemed like a relic of a bygone era. Then came 1968. NBC offered Elvis a televised Christmas special, and Colonel Parker envisioned a safe holiday program filled with carols. But Elvis wanted something different. Teaming up with director Steve Binder, he crafted a revolutionary show, part concert, part intimate jam session, part statement of identity. On December 3, 1968, America tuned in and witnessed a rebirth. Clad in black leather, Elvis sat surrounded by fans in a small studio, playing guitar, laughing, sweating, and singing with raw energy. His voice was powerful, his charisma electric, his presence undeniable. Songs like If I Can Dream carried emotion and urgency that reminded the world why Elvis had once been unstoppable. The '68 comeback special was a triumph. Critics hailed it as his return to greatness. Fans rejoiced, declaring the king was back. For Elvis it was a lifeline, proof that he could still matter, still inspire, still burn with fire. The Las Vegas years after the comeback, Elvis was determined to reclaim the stage. In 1969, he began a residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, where he performed 2 shows a night for weeks at a time. At first it was exhilarating. The crowds roared, the shows sold out, and Elvis poured himself into the performances. He sang old hits, gospel numbers, and powerful new ballads like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto. The shows were a spectacle, flashy jumpsuits, dramatic lighting, and an orchestra backing his powerful voice. Elvis became synonymous with Vegas glamour. For fans it was a chance to see their idol up close, and for Elvis, it was a return to what he loved most, live performance. But soon the grind wore him down. The schedule was relentless, the pressure immense, and the loneliness suffocating. To keep going, Elvis leaned more heavily on prescription drugs, pills to wake up, pills to sleep, pills for pain. His dependency grew into an unbreakable chain. The cost of fame. By the early 1970s, Elvis's marriage to Priscilla was unraveling. The demands of his career, his erratic behavior, and his drug use created a gulf between them. In 1973, they divorced, though Elvis remained deeply attached to Lisa Marie. He told friends that losing Priscilla was like losing a part of himself. On stage, Elvis could still deliver magic. His voice, though strained at times, carried unmatched emotion. Songs like An American Trilogy brought audiences to tears, but off-stage, he was increasingly isolated. Graceland became his fortress, and those around him, the Memphis Mafia, his inner circle of friends and employees, enabled his habits rather than challenged them. Colonel Parker, ever the businessman, continued to push Elvis into tours and shows, regardless of his health. Parker's gambling debts in Las Vegas only tightened the cycle. The more Parker owed, the more Elvis had to perform. Elvis, exhausted and dependent, complied. His once chiseled body grew bloated. His vibrant stage moves slowed. Critics noticed, mocking his weight and erratic shows. Yet through it all, the fans remained loyal. To them, Elvis was not just a performer, he was a symbol of their youth, their memories, their America. The slow decline. By the mid-1970s, the decline was undeniable. Elvis's health deteriorated. His heart strained under the weight of constant medication. His mood swung wildly. On some nights, he performed brilliantly, giving glimpses of the old fire. On others, he was incoherent, struggling to get through songs. Still, the tickets sold. Fans filled arenas, desperate to see him one more time, to touch the magic, to say they had been in the presence of the king. For Elvis, those moments on stage were both salvation and curse. They gave him purpose but drained what little strength he had left. Behind closed doors, Elvis grew increasingly paranoid and reclusive. He surrounded himself with bodyguards and friends, but in truth, he was alone. He read obsessively about religion, philosophy, and the afterlife, searching for meaning in the chaos of his existence. By 1976, those close to him knew the end was near. His health was failing, his body bloated, his energy fading. Yet Colonel Parker booked another tour, another series of shows, another chance to squeeze money from a man who had already given too much. And so, in the summer of 1977, Elvis prepared once more to go on the road. But fate had other plans. The summer of 1977 was unbearably hot in Memphis. At Graceland, behind the iron gates, Elvis Presley was preparing for yet another tour. His body was failing, his spirit exhausted, but his sense of duty to his fans, and perhaps his fear of being forgotten, drove him forward. He told those closest to him that he still had music to give, even if his health told another story. In early August, Elvis spent much of his time secluded in his upstairs suite. He read books on spirituality, life after death, and the mysteries of the human soul. Friends recalled him speaking about destiny, about feeling trapped between the expectations of the world and his own longing for peace. He seemed restless, torn between the man he once was and the fragile figure he had become. On August 15th, he rehearsed for his upcoming tour. Witnesses said his voice, though weaker, still carried that unmistakable resonance. He joked, laughed, and even smiled, as if clinging to the last flickers of his old self. That night, he spent time at the piano, singing gospel songs that had comforted him since childhood. For a brief moment, the king seemed at peace, lost in the music that had once saved him. In the early hours of August 16th, Elvis retired to his suite with his fiancée, Ginger Alden. Restless, he took a book and headed to the bathroom, telling her he would join her soon. Hours later, Ginger awoke to silence. She found him collapsed on the floor. Efforts to revive him failed. The king of rock and roll was gone. He was just 42 years old. The news spread like wildfire. Television networks broke into programming. Radio stations replayed his songs, and fans gathered outside Graceland in stunned silence. For millions, it felt like the end of an era. Elvis Presley, the boy from Tupelo, the rebel who shook America, the man who had given his life to music, was suddenly a memory. His funeral on August 18th drew tens of thousands to Memphis. The streets overflowed with mourners. Some fainted in the heat, others wept uncontrollably. Inside Graceland, friends and family struggled to comprehend the loss. Priscilla stood quietly, Lisa Marie, too young to understand that her father was gone forever. Outside, the world mourned as if a piece of its own heart had been ripped away. Yet even in death, Elvis remained larger than life. Rumors swirled that he had faked his death, that he was living in secret, that the king could never truly die. These myths only added to his legend, ensuring that his presence lingered long after August 1977. But Elvis Presley's real legacy is not in conspiracy theories. It is in the music. It is in the raw power of jailhouse rock, the yearning of Can't Help Falling in Love, the gospel fire of How Great Thou Art. It is in the memories of those who saw him live, who felt his energy transform a stage, who believed, if only for a moment, that anything was possible. Elvis gave voice to a generation that wanted freedom, rhythm, and rebellion. He bridged cultures, bringing black and white music together in a way America had never dared before. He inspired countless musicians, from the Beatles to Bruce Springsteen, and shaped the sound of modern music. Even today, nearly half a century after his death, tourists flock to Graceland, tribute artists fill theaters. His songs stream to millions. His image adorns posters, t-shirts, and even the Las Vegas Strip, where impersonators keep the spirit alive. Elvis has become more than a man. He is a myth, a legend, a symbol. But behind the legend was a human being, a boy who lost his twin brother at birth, a son who adored his mother, a man who craved love, and an artist who gave everything, until there was nothing left to give. Elvis Presley lived fast, loved deeply, suffered quietly, and died too young. Yet his story continues, retold through every note, every photograph, every memory. Because Elvis was not just the king of rock and roll, he was the king of hearts, the king of dreams, the king of a cultural revolution that will never fade. And in the end, Elvis Presley's greatest triumph is this: though his body lies in Graceland, his voice, his spirit, and his music live forever. Legends never truly die. And Elvis Presley, the boy from Tupelo, who became the king, will always live on.